The candelabra gleamed like a crown atop its throne, silent, regal, and deadly. When a man is found murdered in a luxury hotel room, every detail seems intentional. But was it art, or something far more sinister? As egos clash, secrets unravel, and symmetry hides a poisoner's hand, one thing becomes clear. Some crimes are staged to perfection. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. I'd been sent to the Monarch Hotel with instructions no more specific than meet him at the bar and keep your ears open. Wolfe doesn't go in for long briefings when he's not convinced it's worth the breath. The Monarch wasn't my kind of place. Too much polished brass and not enough polish on the clientele. He was easy to spot. Not because he stood out, but because he was trying too hard not to. Burgundy tie with a Windsor knot that looked like it had been strangled twice. Hair combed in a way that said public defender on a date. The kind of man who stared at his drink like it owed him money. I slid onto the stool next to him and ordered a club soda, partly for appearances, and partly because it was 3 in the afternoon. He didn't look over. "You're Mr. Goodwin," he said quietly. "You don't look like him." I smiled. "You're not the first to say that. You got something for me, or are we doing this in riddles?" He looked around. Not nervously. No, rehearsed, like a man who'd practiced being nervous in a mirror. And just like that, my neck told me this was going to get weird. "I don't have much time," he said, pressing his fingertips to the rim of his glass like it might vibrate Morse code. "You tell Wolfe I want him to take this, but he mustn't contact me. No names. Not yet." "You'll forgive me," I said, "if I find that a bit backwards. Most people who want Nero Wolfe's help start with their name, usually right after they write a check." He shook his head. "I'm already being watched. If I talk too much, someone dies. Might be me, might be someone else. That's the problem." He reached into his coat pocket, slowly, like a man scared of what he might find, and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the bar, under the napkin holder. I let my fingers brush it without looking down. "You tell Wolfe," he said. "This is about something older than all of us. Tell him. Tell him not to let them move the candelabra." Then he glanced toward the lobby, blinked twice, and stiffened. And that's when I knew this guy wasn't just playing nervous. He was on a clock. I turned my head casually, but the only thing I saw in the lobby was a bellhop talking to a potted plant and a woman with a hat large enough to qualify for weather status. Mr. L, he hadn't offered anything else, drained the last of his drink, stood up without a word, and walked out like someone had called his number from upstairs. I didn't stop him. When a man gives you an envelope with the subtlety of a spy novel and then flees the scene, you don't chase, you wait, and you read. I gave it 5 minutes, paid my tab, and walked out like I had an afternoon dental appointment to dread. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was still in conference with his orchids, so I took the liberty of examining the mystery gift alone in the office. Inside the envelope was a sheet of creamy paper, thick enough to insult lesser stationery, with a precise floor plan, room 13, Monarch Hotel. At the bottom, in block letters, "Don't let them move the candelabra. I don't spook easy." But something about that phrasing felt ceremonial. When Wolfe finally emerged from the greenhouse, smelling faintly of loam and disdain, I was still staring at the paper. "Well?" he demanded, settling into the big chair like he'd been lowered there by gods and pulley. "Your client, maybe client, met me at the Monarch, gave me this, and bolted. Didn't like the look of someone in the lobby, or maybe he just hates bars." Wolfe took the paper, turned it in his fingers once, then snorted. "There is no room 13 at the Monarch," he said, as if that were the end of the matter. "Apparently there is, and someone cares enough about what's inside to risk my good looks and your schedule." He held the floor plan up to the light. "These proportions are off. An architectural afterthought, likely sealed and reopened. A superstition dodged, then indulged." I raised an eyebrow. "So it does exist?" He didn't look at me. "It shouldn't." There was something in his voice. Not fear, exactly. More like contempt. And that, from Wolfe, always meant something was about to get serious. Fritz brought in the tea with a tray that looked like it had been stolen from Versailles. I poured mine and waited for Wolfe to wax poetic about people who leave mysterious documents in bars, but he was already halfway lost to his thoughts. "You know," I said, "you might be the only man in New York who could ignore a murder hint, an envelope, and a floor plan with architectural guilt written all over it." "I am ignoring no such thing," he replied, sipping. "I am declining to leap to melodrama." "I know melodrama," I said. This wasn't it. The guy was scared, sure, but like a man who already made a choice he didn't like. Wolfe made a sour face at his cup. "Any man who chooses to meet you in a bar must already be in peril." "Now that," I said, "hurts." He didn't smile, which told me he was interested, more than he let on. I just hadn't said the thing that would shove him into motion yet. But something told me the phone would. It rang precisely at 7:14 p.m., slicing through the silence of the office with all the elegance of a scream in church. I got to it before Fritz could. "Brownstone residence," I said. "Goodwin speaking." "Monarch Hotel," said a crisp voice. "This is the front desk. We're trying to locate a Mr. Lemaire, a registered guest. He has not been seen since yesterday, and his room was found unoccupied. The concierge found your name on a note in the trash. We were told you might know how to reach him." I said I'd look into it, hung up, and turned. Wolfe was already watching me, his fingers tented like a man about to recite scripture. "Well?" he asked. "Guest named Lemaire," I said. "Didn't check out. Didn't come back. But he left a note with my name on it, and his trail's gone cold." Wolfe didn't blink. "Have Mr. Goodwin put on his coat." That was Wolfe's version of a starter pistol. There are a few things I consider sacred. Coffee before conversation, jazz without commercials, and Fritz's Saturday sausage with marjoram. So when I unfolded the morning paper and saw a headline on the front page that included the words, "Unidentified man found dead in room 13, at the Monarch Hotel no less, it took the shine off my breakfast faster than a bad egg. Fritz noticed my expression and narrowed his eyes. "You are grimacing at the Times. That means either the Yankees traded badly or someone has died poorly." "Worse," I said, folding the paper. "Somebody turned room 13 into a coffin. Monarch Hotel." He froze, ladle in hand. "Monarch has no room 13. Tell that to the stiff they just pulled out of it." I took my coffee to the office, where Wolfe was already buried in his orchids. I didn't announce the news immediately. I let it hang there in the air like the scent of burnt toast. Timing is everything with Wolfe, and so is provocation. The headline was short, but the implication wasn't. Room 13, Monarch Hotel, unnamed corpse. I had a feeling my weekend had just filed for divorce. When I finally opened my mouth to share the news, Wolfe didn't even look up. He was tending to a stubborn cattleya that, by his standards, had committed horticultural treason. "There's a dead man in room 13, I said, "at the Monarch. I have no interest in the supernatural, Mr. Goodwin." "This isn't supernatural. It's just dead, and probably the same guy who gave me that envelope yesterday." Coincidence is a crippled crutch. Let the police do what they are paid to do. Inadequately. He reached for his bottle of yellow mineral oil, the one that smelled like wealth and patience. I kept going. Locked room. No signs of forced entry. Unnamed guest. Ring any bells? None that chime pleasantly, he said, snorting. The only thing worse than superstition is involvement. It wasn't a no, not really. More like a maybe later, if it offends my logic enough. Wolfe liked puzzles. He just preferred them polite, bloodless, and framed under glass. This one had dropped itself on our front step with the subtlety of a grand piano, and it hadn't played its last note yet. The monarch looked more like a mausoleum than a hotel that morning. Heavy carpeting, hushed voices, and a crime scene stench of old money and new trouble. I flashed a fake badge to the front desk. Wolfe doesn't like it, but it works, and took the elevator to the 10th floor. Room 13 wasn't on the directory, but it was there all right, tucked between 11 and 15 like a secret shame. The door stood half open, guarded by a wiry young man in a suit 2 sizes too large. "Staff only," he said, uncertain. "Tell that to the guy inside." He hesitated, then let me through. The room was classic monarch. Velvet drapes, crystal sconces, and a smell of cologne, brandy, and bleach. The body lay on the floor beside the bed, face down, arms arranged a little too neatly. But what caught my eye wasn't the corpse. It was the candelabra, bronze, heavy, and turned to face the wall, as if it had been scolded. "No one stays in this room," the bellhop whispered behind me. I turned. "Why not?" "Because officially, sir, it doesn't exist." Well, that made 2 things in this case that didn't: sanity and an exit plan. The guy on the floor was in his 40s, dressed like he was trying to be invisible. Grey jacket, scuffed shoes, dark slacks. He had no wallet, no papers, no room key in his pocket. Just a handkerchief, monogrammed with a single L. It was a match. Mr. Burgundy Tie, the guy who had slipped me the envelope at the bar, had just gone from nervous to horizontal. I scanned the room for anything the boys in blue might have missed. Under the mattress, tucked into the corner like a forgotten confession, was a folded piece of paper. No markings on the outside. I pocketed it. Wolfe calls that tampering. I call it insurance. Outside, I could already hear the low rumble of official feet in official shoes. I took one last look at the candelabra. Someone had touched it, recently. The base was smudged, and the angle was all wrong. You don't misalign something that symmetrical unless you're hiding something. I had a hunch the brass beast wasn't just for ambience, but I was about to have my thinking interrupted by a familiar voice that could wrinkle concrete. "Goodwin!" came the growl. There he was, Inspector Kramer, in a brown suit that looked like it had been chewed by a radiator and pressed with hostility. He shoved past the bellhop, nostrils flaring like a bloodhound late for dinner. "Why the hell are you here?" "Tourism," I said. "Big fan of invisible rooms." He glared at me, then at the body. "You and Wolfe sniffing around this early means there's more here than a stiff and a silver stick." "You wound me," I said. "Wolfe doesn't sniff, he broods." Kramer stepped over the corpse and eyed the candelabra. "Don't tell me he sent you for that thing." "I don't tell you things you won't like, Inspector. Saves time." He grunted. "Well, don't touch anything. This one's mine." I gave him a little bow and made for the hallway. Kramer was right. There was more here. But the question wasn't what. It was who had the guts to use a locked hotel room like a magician's box, one where the trick ended with a dead body and no applause. Back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe a crude sketch of the room and the candelabra's new orientation. He was at his desk, sipping beer and pretending not to care. He studied the angle I'd drawn. 78 degrees, he said. Not random, and not functional. You can tell that from a squiggle? I asked. He ignored me. That candelabra is French, late 18th century, bronze, not brass. And the base, is it hollow? Felt heavy, but off balance. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. No French artisan misaligned symmetry. Someone moved it, with purpose. Any guesses what that purpose was? None I care to speculate on without further evidence. That was wolf speak for you're onto something. Go sweat it out while I think. He went back to sipping his beer. Fritz appeared with a plate of something buttery and complicated, which Wolfe accepted with imperial nod. Shall I dig up more on French candlesticks? I asked. No, Wolfe said. Dig up more on the corpse. The candelabra did not die in that room. It was a riddle with wax and weight behind it, and Wolfe had just begun to enjoy the smell of the puzzle. I swung back by the Monarch that evening, this time with less attitude and more interest in ghosts. The concierge, a thin man with the expression of a dried lemon, was more cooperative after a donation to the staff holiday fund. Room 13, he whispered. We don't advertise it. It's not on the brochure. I noticed. It was sealed for 25 years, after the senator died there in 78. Before that, a French heiress in the 50s. Always very private guests. Very exclusive. How exclusive? He swallowed. There have only been 4 reservations in that room since 1935. All special requests. All ended badly. I leaned in. How badly? He blinked. All dead? Suicides? Accidents? This last one. Well, let me guess, I said. Same candelabra every time? He nodded, just once. That clinched it. Someone was using room 13 like a stage, same set piece, new corpses. And if Wolfe was right, it wasn't about murder. It was about message. And that candelabra? It was the opening line. You can learn a lot about people by what they order at a hotel, especially if you're pretending to be the guy who covers what the hotel's insurance won't. I walked into the Monarch that morning carrying a clipboard, a fake badge, and a face that said I was too tired to lie, but too official not to be telling the truth. That's the sweet spot. The front desk clerk didn't question me when I asked for guest logs, just handed them over like I was the IRS, and his conscience was clean. I wasn't looking for names. I was looking for flourishes. Foreign-sounding ones, written in handwriting too elegant to be legal. There she was. Madame Sabine Lenoir, Suite 1104, Paris. And from the notes on the room service slip, she had ordered grapefruit, triple-milled soap, and rose-scented steam towels. Perfume, pedigree, and pretension. It all travels in the same elevator. And if there was anyone in the building who knew why a dead man left behind a cryptic floor plan and a candelabra, it was the woman whose name smelled like lacquer and lies. Suite 1104 had a doorbell shaped like a fleur-de-lis, and the kind of silence behind it that cost $900 a night. She opened the door halfway, just enough to let one shoulder and a silk robe peek through. The robe was cream, the eyes were darker, and the cigarette holder between her fingers was long enough to suggest it doubled as a fencing foil on weekends. Yes, she said, in an accent that made vowels sound expensive. I introduced myself as an insurance liaison sent to verify a claim about antique property on the premises. She didn't ask for credentials. She didn't need to. She knew I was lying, and she didn't care. You are very enthusiastic for an insurance man, she said, stepping back and motioning me in. But then, Americans are often passionate about paperwork. She sat on a velvet chaise, legs crossed, smoke curling upward like it was being conducted. Her name was Sabine Lenoir, she said, art dealer, specialist in 18th century French decor, 5 languages, 3 galleries, and the kind of smile that knew the value of distraction. The cigarette holder was longer than her patience, and probably deadlier. I started slow. Questions about the monarch, about the ambience, about whether she had noticed anything unusual about the decor. She indulged me with the mild boredom of a woman used to being interrogated without consequences. "Room 13?" she said, when I steered the conversation toward the topic. "I thought the Americans skipped such numbers, very superstitious, like avoiding cheese after midnight." "Not this time. Someone died in there. Did you know the guest?" She shrugged, exhaled a line of smoke into the ceiling. "I saw a man in the hallway once, pale, nervous. He had the look of a man visiting his conscience." "What about the candelabra?" At this, something flickered, and not just in the candle on the table beside her. She looked at me for a half-second too long, then smiled. "Forged," she said. "Crude replica of a piece once owned by the Duc de Valère. You can tell by the base. Too thick. It is not real." "Still," I said, "must be valuable to someone." She glanced toward the candle and smirked. "Value is often measured by how badly someone wants to lie about it." She turned away, but she was still admiring the fake, and I was starting to think it wasn't. She offered me tea. I accepted out of politeness and curiosity, in that order. While she clinked around with porcelain and precision, I let my eyes drift. The suite was curated, not decorated, everything in its place, every object slightly too perfect, except for the wastebasket. Under a crumpled page of society gossip and what looked like a used face mask, I saw it. The corner of a Monarch hotel receipt, folded but not torn. I moved across the room to adjust my shoe. My hand came up with the receipt a second later, tucked under my cuff. Sleight of hand, Archie style. When she turned around, she caught me glancing at the teacups. "You like the china?" she asked sweetly. "Almost as much as I like the view." She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. Back in the hallway, I opened the slip. It was a minibar statement. Dated tomorrow. Room 13. Brandy. Twice. And Sabine's initials at the bottom. Whatever game she was playing, she wasn't playing alone. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the rundown while Fritz ladled beef consommé into delicate porcelain bowls and muttered things in German that sounded like insults aimed at France. She served me jasmine tea in a room that smelled like wax and fogged silk, I said. "She's definitely hiding something." Fritz scoffed. "Of course she is. French dealers are all the same. They overprice the fake, undervalue the real, and serve soup without salt." "She said the candelabra was a replica," I added. Fritz's eyes narrowed. "Ah, forgery, the only art France exports consistently." Wolfe, who had been listening without comment, finally broke in. "A counterfeit is only forgivable when it is culinary." That got Fritz smiling. I handed Wolfe the hotel receipt and the monogrammed initials. He didn't look surprised. Sabine Lenoir might not have killed anyone, yet, but she'd danced too close to something that did, and I had the uncomfortable feeling she wasn't done lying. "She's lying," Wolfe said. "No kidding. She's lying," he repeated, "but not because she is guilty of the murder. She is protecting a transaction." I raised an eyebrow. "Art deal gone sideways?" "Possibly. More likely something else. Something she wants to keep buried more than she wants to avoid suspicion." He tapped the floor plan again. "She knows the candelabra is real, and that it was never meant to be found." "That makes it motive?" "Not yet," Wolfe said, "but it makes it interesting." I leaned back. "So she didn't kill him, but she might have set the table?" "Precisely. If Wolfe was right, and the safe money said he was, then Sabine. Lenoir wasn't a murderer. She was a messenger. The only problem was, I didn't like the look of what she was trying to deliver. The phone rang at 11:56 p.m. I had just gotten comfortable in bed with a Raymond Chandler paperback and half a beer. "Goodwin," I said. A woman's voice, low and precise, French accent, familiar. "He lit the wrong candle," she whispered. Then nothing. No click. No tone. Just the soft hush of a line that didn't want to give up its ghosts. I sat up. The words echoed. He lit the wrong candle. I didn't need Wolfe to tell me what it meant, but I went to his door anyway, knocked once, and gave him the message. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, softly, "Someone fears the flame will reach them next. And the thing is, I think they were right." The next morning found Wolfe in his chair, planted like a redwood with an ego. He had already inhaled a glass of beer and was buried in his copy of A History of Baroque Interior Illusions, a title that, despite my protests, actually existed. I stood there with the Monarch mystery still sizzling in my pocket and decided to try again. "It's shaping up strange, boss," I said. "Room 13 that doesn't exist. A man who did but now doesn't. A French candelabra with the personality of a stage prop. And a woman who lies in silk." Wolfe didn't look up. "You mistake contrivance for consequence." "This was your envelope." "Yes. It is now also the police's body, and the hotel's scandal." He turned a page delicately. "I'm just saying," I prodded, "a locked room and a historical candle seem more your taste than mine." "When a man dies in a room that shouldn't exist," Wolfe muttered, "the only proper response is indifference." So that was the mood, dismissive with a garnish of disdain. But I knew better than to take the first no from Wolfe, or the third. Wolfe had just resumed ignoring me when Fritz entered, apron immaculate and eyes gleaming with unsolicited opinion. "Forgive me," he said, carrying a tray that smelled like buttered insight. "But may I speak of the candle?" "Candelabra," I corrected helpfully. "3 arms, bronze, heavy, possibly haunted." Fritz nodded gravely. "With lilies carved at the base." Wolfe looked up. Barely. That was Fritz's victory. "I have seen it," Fritz declared, "in a Viennese volume of Bourbon Toulouse artifacts. Royal collection. Only 3 made. 2 in the Louvre. 1 lost to revolution." Wolfe took the tray and stared at the ceiling. "If this becomes a culinary metaphor, I shall leave the room." "It does not," Fritz said. "But lilies, those lilies, are impossible to forge. No forger gets lilies right. The petals turn inward unnaturally. The curvature, it is always wrong." Wolfe blinked once. That meant something had landed. "Your tea," Fritz added, setting it down. "And a question. Would a French art dealer lie about such a thing, or fear it?" "Irrelevant," Wolfe said, but his voice had thickened by a fraction, and that meant I wasn't the only one who'd been poked. "By the way," I said casually, stirring sugar into the tea I had no intention of drinking, "our silk-wrapped Sabine Lenoir let something slip." Wolfe gave me the kind of glance normally reserved for wilted orchids and broken glass. "She mentioned a man named Ogilvy de Rowe." That did it. The teacup paused mid-air. Wolfe's brow furrowed. A geological event. He set the cup down with surgical precision and looked directly at me. "She did?" Didn't seem proud of it. More like the name escaped. Then she covered it with lace and nonsense. "He's not dead yet?" Wolfe asked, quietly, to no one in particular. "Apparently not. Still dabbling in antiques, theft, and ego inflation." Wolfe leaned back. "Then I suspect the candelabra is real." There it was. The turn. Not a decision. Not yet. but an opening of the gates. And when Wolfe opens gates, something big and unpleasant usually strolls through. Wolfe got up, which for him meant the world was shifting on its axis, and paced between the globe and his orchids like a man measuring his pride against his principles. "Nero," he muttered, "pompous, derivative, collected only what others could not afford, laughed at my evaluation of the Verona Madonna, called it provincial romanticism." I kept quiet. I'd seen this play before. Wolfe fuming not because he was wrong, but because he had been insulted in Latin by a man who knew what trompe-l'oeil meant and how to pronounce it. "If that candelabra is genuine," he said, "and Nero's hands are near it, I am compelled." That was practically a signed confession. I gave him a look. "So the corpse still doesn't tempt you, but the Frenchman with the pedigree and the petty insults does." "I do not choose cases based on temptation," Wolfe said stiffly. "Of course not. He chooses them based on insult, history, and the opportunity to grind someone's legacy into powder." "Very well," Wolfe said, returning to his chair and resettling with all the finality of a cathedral door closing. "I will consider pursuing this matter." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a change of tune." "It is not a tune. It is a condition. You will bring me something I can verify. Something true, not circumstantial, not poetic." He closed his eyes for half a second. "Something that screams authenticity." "Screams how?" I asked. "Use your judgment," he said. "I assume you still possess it." That wasn't an insult. From Wolfe, it was practically a warm embrace. I nodded. "You want one unshakable fact by sundown? Done." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "If the lilies are real, I want their soil. If the wax is from Versailles, I want its scent." He paused. "And Goodwin, bring back the truth, not perfume." He didn't trust Sabine's stories, but he trusted his own nose, and mine, when properly directed. Now it was up to me to find the one thing Wolfe couldn't ignore. As I headed for the door, my smile was mechanical but practiced. I didn't need Fritz's commentary to know Wolfe had just unchained himself from his inertia, not for murder, not for mystery, but for pride. Ogilvy Nero, that was the matchstick. I pulled on my coat and grabbed my notebook. Outside, the day was grey enough to match the case. Not just murder in a locked room, but ego, imitation, and antique rage. The kind of thing Wolfe found irresistible once it scratched the right corner of his brain. A rival's name had done what a body couldn't. I thought back to the drawing in the envelope, to the way the candelabra faced the wall like a misbehaving child. I thought about Sabine and her brandy receipts. I thought about how easily people lie when surrounded by beautiful things. And I thought, not for the first time, a murder didn't move him. A rival name did. That's Nero Wolfe, and I live with him. There are many ways to get a hotel concierge to spill what's behind the key rack. Charm, guile, and a $20 bill work best, especially when the charm's wearing a press badge and the guile's sipping complimentary lobby coffee like it's vintage cognac. I'd resurrected an old ID from the New York Mirror and pressed it into service with a straight face. The Monarch's lobby was its usual cocktail of brass, velvet, and unspoken scandal. The concierge wore a canary yellow waistcoat that made him look like a dangerous omelette. "Strictly off the record," I said, palming the bill like a magician palming his rabbit. "Were there any unregistered guests on the 10th floor the night of the incident?" He didn't blink. He just looked down at the cash like it had insulted his mother, then slowly tucked it under his desk pad. "There were 2. No names on file. Elevator logs show they went up to the 10th around 2:30 a.m., stayed less than an hour." Room 13? He sniffed. No such room, sir. Of course not. But $20 had just confirmed 2 ghosts had walked the hall that night, and 1 hadn't left alive. His name was Tito, and he had the kind of posture that screamed he didn't want to be noticed, which of course made him stick out like a sore valet. He was folding towels in the hallway, doing a passable impression of being useful, when I caught his eye and gave him my most casual, "Don't worry, I'm just snooping" smile. "Room 13, I said quietly. "Talk to me." He blinked twice, until I clocked fast, and looked around like the wallpaper had ears. "I saw someone leave," he muttered. 3:17 a.m. "Sure about the time?" "Clock on the elevator. I was delivering towels to 108. "And you're sure it was room 13? He nodded, eyes still skittering like marbles on tile. Door opened. He walked out. Didn't look back. "Describe him." Tito hesitated. "Gloves, slim, grey coat, moved like a priest or a dancer," he said finally, "but not both. Now, I've known a few men who could qualify as one or the other. This guy apparently straddled the line between holy water and high kick. If Tito was right, someone had left room 13 after the murder, and they hadn't planned on being seen. There's a time-honored tradition in detective work of staring at windows like they owe you money. I've done it in enough hotels to know the difference between a view and an escape route. Room 13's window was unlocked. A minor miracle in a city where ventilation and sanity both come at a price. I popped it open and leaned out. There, on the narrow stone ledge just outside, were 2 indisputable, irrefutable signs of life. Pigeon droppings, fresh, white, and artistically splattered like Jackson Pollock's lesser works. But more important was the scuff. Faint, but there. Rubber sole, judging by the texture. Scraped left to right, then back again, like someone had hesitated or turned around. The ledge ran to an adjacent suite, 20 feet down. Suite 1310, if I was counting windows right. A luxury corner unit. According to the hotel's records, it had been booked the day of the murder, under the name Daniel Reiter, which didn't exist in the phone book, police files, or anywhere that mattered. Someone had exited that window like it was an alley door, and they'd brought the murder with them. I knocked on Sabine Lenoir's door just before lunch, hoping she was the type to lie better on an empty stomach. She answered in a lavender dressing gown and looked like she hadn't slept since 1942. "You again," she said, arching one perfect eyebrow. "You American men are quite persistent. Is it patriotism or flirtation?" "Neither," I said. "You told me you slept through the night. Still true?" "Of course." "Straight through?" She yawned theatrically. A sleeping mask and a bottle of Cointreau. I could have missed the apocalypse. "Convenient," I said. She shrugged. Either she was telling the truth, or Cointreau was now selling dreamless sleep in travel size. I didn't press further. Not then. But as I left, I noticed her perfume had changed. It wasn't rose this time. It was something smokier. And that meant something had shifted. Whether it was her story or the person she was protecting, I didn't know yet. But she was wide awake now. Back at the brownstone, I gave Wolfe the update while Fritz hovered with a tray of almond biscuits and disapproval. Room 13's window opens to a ledge, adjacent room booked under a fake name, and Sabine's alibi has more holes than Fritz's colander. Wolfe, in his chair, lifted one brow. "The candelabra?" "Still there, still crooked." "Photograph it," he said. Fritz, who'd been silent so far, finally cleared his throat. "That object?" "Yes," Wolfe said without turning. "I believe the base may be detachable, if one were to smuggle something cylindrical and vile," he said delicately. "This would do nicely." Wolfe turned. Explain. Fritz folded the napkin on the tray. Some antique ritual pieces are hollow. It protects scrolls, poisons, even blades. This design is too symmetrical to be merely ornamental. Wolfe grunted, which for him was practically applause. I took the hint. The candelabra wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was a container. The question was, what had it contained? And was it still there? She was about 5 feet tall, wore orthopedic shoes, and had the memory of an elephant on espresso. The chambermaid, Maria, had been working the monarch's 10th floor for 18 years. I caught her folding towels near the service elevator. You cleaned room 13 last week? She hesitated. I was told not to speak about that room. I'm not the police. I'm the guy who's trying to make sure no one else ends up dead in it. She sighed. I cleaned it 2 days before the incident. Something strange. Go on. Wax shavings, she said. On the rug, beneath the nightstand. Candles weren't lit, I said. No burn, just flakes, like someone shaved them. I thanked her, and left a tip large enough to count as a confession in certain countries. So somebody was shaving wax in a room with no candles burning, and a man who ended up dead. Whatever it wasn't ritual. It was preparation. I snapped a dozen pictures of the candelabra, close-ups, angles, a few with scale for reference. Wolfe took one look at the prints and nodded like a man recognizing a former student who'd disappointed him professionally. There, he said, tapping the base. See the hairline gap? And there, a hinge. Brass. Hand-tooled. You think it opens? I do not think, Mr. Goodwin. I observe. Someone tampered with this object. It was used, recently, and deliberately. Fritz handed him a cloth. Any fingerprints? One partial, I said, from the outer rim. Wolfe held the photo up to the light. The hinge mechanism is uncommon. Whoever opened it would not have done so casually. He set the photo down and looked at me. What interests me is not what was placed inside, but what had to be taken out. That gave me a chill, because if something had been removed, the real question was, who had it now? And what were they planning to do with it? Kramer didn't knock. That would have required civility and 2 seconds of patience, both of which he'd obviously left on the sidewalk. The front door flung open like a grudge, and he came stomping into the office, trailing a cloud of cigar smoke thick enough to classify as domestic warfare. I met him halfway, not out of politeness, but to keep him from grinding Fritz's antique runner into retirement. Inspector, I said, welcome to the greenhouse for grown men with grudges. You come bearing flame? He growled. Where's Wolfe? Wolfe's where he always is at 9:36 a.m., praying to orchids and avoiding you. That earned me a snarl and a puff. Kramer's face looked like it had tried to negotiate with a fire hydrant and lost on principle. Your boss is poking around a case that's none of his damn business. He prefers the term investigative philanthropy. Kramer's eyes were red, his shirt collar wilted, and his temper pre-lit. You talked to hotel staff. You took photos of evidence. You spooked a chambermaid. Want to explain what the hell you two are doing? Behind me, I heard the elevator start its crawl. Wolfe was descending, and with him the temperature would drop. Just not for long. Wolfe entered like a man arriving to inspect a disappointing statue. He was composed, mildly annoyed, and carrying the expression of someone who'd been summoned to referee a chess match between pigeons. Inspector, he said, motioning curtly to the red chair. You may sit. The chair will survive. Kramer didn't sit. Wolfe did. In his throne behind the desk, where he folded his hands like a man about to write scripture. You're interfering, Kramer barked. I am correcting, Wolfe replied. A subtle but vital distinction. Kramer stepped closer. You're tampering. I've got a bellhop you harassed and a concierge wondering if you're a hotel critic. You have, Wolfe said coolly, a murder victim in a room designed to mislead, and a clue hiding in decorative daylight. Kramer blinked. In what? The Candelabra, Wolfe said, as if teaching the alphabet to a goat. Its asymmetry, its history, its twin. Kramer huffed, ignoring the chair. You think wax sculptures talk now? Wolfe's smile was frosty. I think the NYPD's commitment to brute conclusions renders my involvement necessary. You prefer riddles. I prefer clarity. You prefer handcuffs to thought. I can't help that. And that, folks, was only the opening bell. It was getting warm in there, emotionally, if not thermally. So I did what any red-blooded New Yorker does when a volcano's building pressure. I poured coffee. Cream, sugar, or just the boiling kind? I asked Kramer, handing him a mug that had seen better tempers. He waved it off. Save it for your boss's next sermon. Wolfe sipped his own cup like it held the nectar of logic. Archie, inform the inspector what you observed on the rug. With pleasure, I said. Wax shavings, right under the candelabra, neatly scraped, never melted. Odd, considering the candles were never lit. Kramer snorted. So someone polished a candle. Call the Times. Funny, I said, that forensics didn't even list it. Too busy writing it off as hotel dandruff. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Wolfe tilted his head. There is a difference between data and evidence. Your department collects the former. I divine the latter. And you do that how? Kramer barked. By noticing what lazy men miss, Wolfe said. I handed Kramer a napkin. Might want to wipe that coffee off your pride. The next round would hurt more than caffeine. Kramer slammed his mug onto the desk like he was testing its patience. You got jokes and furniture. I got a body. Care to remember which one matters? I recall precisely, Wolfe said. And I note, with regret, that the body was found beside a singular candelabrum that belongs to a pair. Kramer blinked. What? A pair, Wolfe said, drawing out the syllables. Those pieces were commissioned in the early 19th century by the House of Bourbon-Toulouse, always two, symmetrical down to the engraved fleur-de-lis. Kramer's face grew a shade deeper, somewhere between lobster shell and boiling radiator. And you know this how? Because I have seen them before. The other is missing. I added, and we don't mean stolen, we mean absent, like someone didn't want it seen. Kramer muttered something that might have been English. Wolfe leaned forward, eyes narrowing. A pair designed to hold identical ceremonial flares. One was present, the other was not. Ask yourself why. Silence hung in the air like uncollected rent. For a second, Kramer actually looked thoughtful. Wolfe's fingers tapped the armrest. And Inspector, he added, do not answer aloud. Your first instinct, I assure you, will be foolish. And we weren't even to dessert. Kramer recovered fast, faster than I gave him credit for. Here's a theory, he said. Victim caught someone snooping. Struggle. Candle thing falls. Killer panics. Takes something. Leaves the rest. Ah, Wolfe said. Robbery gone wrong. It fits. It fits, Wolfe echoed, like a left shoe on a right foot. It covers something, but not well. Kramer jabbed a finger. You just want credit. Front page, private sleuth outwits cops. Same old Wolfe. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That theory is not wrong. It is merely provincial. I piped in. Kind of like saying a tornado is a windy day. Kramer grunted. You're playing games. No, Wolfe said calmly. I am preserving civilization, one act of observation at a time. You're meddling. And yet, Wolfe said, standing slowly. "I suspect it will be my meddling that solves this." There it was. The temperature had dropped, but the tension, that was starting to simmer. Kramer finally gave up on Wolfe's hospitality and made for the door with the posture of a man ready to shoot the next antique in his path. He paused long enough to growl, "Tell your photographer here to stop poking hotel employees." That bellhop was ready to wet his shoes. "I was gentle," I said. "I even tipped." "Yeah, then let me return the favor." He glared at Wolfe. "Stay the hell out of homicide." Wolfe raised an eyebrow. That would require homicide to behave with dignity. Kramer didn't slam the door on his way out. He flung it so hard it probably made the street sneeze. Silence returned to the office like a cautious cat. Wolfe returned to his chair and picked up the book he hadn't read all morning. Infuriating man. "Sure," I said, "but at least he's predictable. Threats, insults, cigar smoke. He's like springtime in Jersey." Wolfe grunted. I poured myself the leftover coffee. That was his way of saying we're close, you know. Wolfe didn't respond, but the glint in his eye, yeah, we were close, real close. The call came just as I was buttering my second croissant. Fritz had outdone himself, hazelnut glaze and all, and I was savouring the kind of breakfast that makes crime feel like a rude interruption. Unfortunately, crime doesn't take polite turns. "Mr. Goodwin," the voice said, "this is Alfredo from the Monarch. I think you should know. Something happened to that maid you asked about." "Define something, Alfredo." "She's in the hospital. There was a gas situation in her suite. They're calling it an accident. But we found a candle burning right on the window ledge." You could have heard my coffee hit the saucer from across the street. The maid. The one who remembered wax on the rug in room 13. Now she was on oxygen in Midtown Mercy with half a lung full of carbon monoxide and enough bad luck to qualify for sainthood. I thanked Alfredo, grabbed my coat, and made for the curb. Gas leaks don't set themselves. And candles on ledges, that's not mood lighting, that's a message. Question was, for whom? The suite reeked of near tragedy, burnt rubber, fried wires, and a trace of something floral, like cheap perfume trying to apologize for being present at the crime. I walked the perimeter slow, one eye on the busted gas valve, the other on the soot-lined trail that crawled up the window frame. And there, precisely centered on the ledge, was the waxy remnant, short, pale, and slightly curved at the base, like it had been shaved to sit flat. Alfredo stood near the door, wringing his hands like a man watching rent money float out the window. "She always lit one candle," he said. "Said it helped her sleep." "Not on the ledge," I muttered, "and not next to an open gas line." There was no question. The gas had been turned on, the candle lit, and the only thing that saved her from becoming roast chambermaid was her decision to step out early and buy aspirin for her niece. Either someone wanted her cooked, or someone wanted to send a scorched reminder about discretion. And I don't believe in coincidences, especially not the flaming kind. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat hunched in the oversized yellow chair, the corners of his mouth flattening with each detail I gave. The flickering candle, the timing, the modified valve, all of it went into the vault. When I finished, he closed his eyes. Not for drama, for computation. "You see," he said, "this is not merely the resumption of violence. It is its refinement. Someone has moved from concealment to ritual." "That's poetic," I said, "but we've still got a guy playing arsonist with a maid." "No," Wolfe snapped. "We have someone illustrating." I blinked. "Illustrating what?" "A concept, possibly moral, possibly aesthetic. A flame placed carefully in one crime. a candelabrum disfigured in another, each element not just a tool, but a gesture, a flourish. I poured him a beer. You think he's an artist? I think, Wolfe said, we are not chasing a weapon. We are decoding a message. The problem was, what kind of lunatic paints in flame? Fritz entered just then with a tray of sliced oranges and an anecdote. You know, he said, placing the fruit with the dignity of a Viennese footman, the court fire of 1884 began the same way. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Fritz nodded solemnly. A pair of ceremonial candles lit in the presence chamber. One was moved, slightly askew. Symbolically it meant betrayal. A minute later, boom! The silk drapery caught, the ceiling collapsed, and 3 minor counts were roasted. That's charming, I said. But unless our killer's a time traveler. No, Wolfe said softly, but perhaps a student of history, a plagiarist with delusions of grandeur. Fritz added, they say one candle was meant for the Empress, the other was for the traitor. Wolfe leaned back. History repeats itself, Mr. Goodwin, especially when no one's listening. So now we had flames, wax, and a psychopath who thought fire was calligraphy. Terrific. I made a mental note to double-check our insurance policy. And Fritz's candle drawer. The hospital room smelled of iodine and overcooked sympathy. The maid, her name was Raquel, had a tube in her nose and a fuzzed-out look like she'd just returned from a very dark place. I offered her water. She offered a whisper. I didn't tell anyone about the wax. That was smart, I said, but not smart enough. She flinched. I saw someone that night, after my shift. I waited. He came down the hall, tall, thin, with a coat too big for summer, and he was carrying a case. Like a suitcase? No, she said. Brass, like a box you put matches in, but long. I sat up, long and brass, like the detachable base of a candelabra. Could you see his face? She shook her head. He wore gloves and walked, slow, like a priest or a dancer. Thank you, I said. Get well, and maybe stick to flashlights. As I left, I dialed Wolfe. We've got a lead, I said, and it has a handle and a hinge. I hit the monarch next, expecting Sabine Lenoir's usual perfume and lies. What I got was a suite with the windows cracked and the scent of unfinished intentions. Checked out this morning? Alfredo said, his hands buried in a folder of room charges. No forwarding address, just paid and left. Bags? 3 Louis Vuitton trunks, picked up by private car. I let that sit. Sabine had been playing fragile chanteuse with a talent for tears and a weakness for Cointreau, but now she'd vanished like last week's gossip column. I walked her suite slowly. The bed was crisp, the mirrors wiped, but the closet still held a trace of something Wolfe would have sniffed out in a heartbeat. Wax, rose wax, and underneath it, faint but sharp, gun oil. If Sabine was our romantic red herring, she was now swimming for international waters, or hiding in plain sight. Either way, we weren't done. The photo I'd taken of the candle's stub lay on Wolfe's desk, next to the candelabrum base and a ruler. Wolfe studied it like it was Talleyrand's will. The residue lines are not chaotic, he muttered. They spiral clockwise. This was no random melt. I shrugged. Maybe the killer likes symmetry. He worships it, Wolfe said. The timing, the placement, the matches. This is less crime than composition. Fritz brought tea. Wolfe didn't touch it. You're saying what? I asked. That he's staging a performance? Yes, Wolfe said. And we are the audience. Each act escalates. First, a symbolic murder, then an attempted immolation, and always the flame. He tapped the ruler against the candelabrum. This is not concealment. It is performance. The props are selected, the players controlled. "And the curtain?" I asked. Wolfe looked at me, eyes like black glass. "That," he said, "has yet to fall." And suddenly, the wax on the rug, the candle on the ledge, the brass box, they weren't just clues. They were choreography, and someone was still dancing. Call it a civic duty or call it trespassing with flair. Either way, I was in the Monarch Hotel's basement, impersonating a New York fire inspector with a borrowed clipboard and a badge I made from a sandwich wrapper and some strategic chutzpah. The place smelled like ancient carpet glue and the regrets of every bellhop who'd ever skipped a shift. I passed two distracted clerks arguing over a broken dolly and slipped into the archive room with the nonchalance of a man who actually belonged there. I didn't. There it was. A squat, brass-handled cabinet with a bold label on the front in handwritten red ink. Confidential, Room 13. I'll give them this. The Monarch may be cursed, but their filing system was terrific. Naturally, the key was missing, but you can't swing a case of arson and ritual murder without learning a thing or two about cheap locks. My lockpick set clicked like a charm. The drawer eased open, revealing a tidy stack of guest ledgers wrapped in linen bands. The real fire, I suspected, wasn't in the gas pipes upstairs. It was in here. The Monarch's ledger entries were elegant, cursive, and, in hindsight, something out of a horror anthology. Room 13 hadn't seen much action, just 4 guests since 1935. But that might have had something to do with the fact that all 4 wound up dead within a week of checking in. Car crash, morphine overdose, one accidental drowning in a marble tub, and the most recent, the culinary critic with a flair for flambe and enemies with access to wax. I stared at the names. They didn't scream serial pattern. They whispered it. No clear connections, no similarities in background. But if Room 13 were a person, it'd be doing life at Sing Sing without parole, plus the electric chair for dessert. Each entry was signed with a flourish, the kind of penmanship you only get with leisure, breeding, or someone faking both. I closed the drawer, careful not to smudge any ghosts. Whatever Wolfe suspected, he wasn't wrong. The room wasn't haunted. It was bait. The last name on the list caught my eye, and then grabbed it by the throat. Count Reynard de Fourneau. Sounded like a man who'd befriend Napoleon and duel someone over a spilled cognac. According to the ledger, he'd checked into Room 13 a week ago, which would have been fine if Count Reynard de Fourneau hadn't died in 1949 in a well-documented Swiss avalanche. His obituary was printed in 3 languages, and he'd been embalmed with ceremony. So what was his name doing scrawled neatly in the hotel's register last Thursday? More curious, the signature. Same swooping R. Same aggressive underline like he was challenging gravity. I cross-checked it against an old scan of a passport application Wolfe had tucked away from an unrelated case. The match was exact. Either the Count had risen from his frosty tomb in perfect calligraphic condition, or someone was wearing his identity like a rented tuxedo, tailored, flattering, and about to be caught mid-button. Back at the brownstone, I laid the ledger in front of Wolfe like a platter of cold cuts. Fritz had made tea, but Wolfe ignored both that and me. He simply stared at the signature with the same expression he used when I rearranged his orchids by accident, somewhere between theological offense and dental pain. I waited. Nothing. Finally, Wolfe said, "Beer." I went and fetched one. By the time I got back, he hadn't moved a muscle, except to shift his eyes to the second name on the list, The heiress who supposedly died in Monte Carlo, whispering confessions no one recorded. "The past is pretending to live," Wolfe said softly. "That is most dangerous." Which, coming from him, was practically a panic attack. I didn't push. I didn't have to. When Wolfe starts connecting corpses to choreography, you give him space, and maybe a backup notebook. The real storm was happening behind those egg-like eyelids. By midnight, the room smelled like beer foam, orchid dew, and old money crimes. Wolfe sat back in his chair like a judge watching a chess match, one where the pieces kept bleeding. He traced each of the Room 13 victims. Senator Callahan from Albany, who took bribes like vitamins; Marguerite Lusan, heiress to a candle empire with blackmail charges unproven but well illustrated; a Saudi diplomat who disappeared after lunch with a famous violinist; and now Mr. L, the flambéed gourmand who probably never saw the second wick. All had secrets, Wolfe said, and all chose or were lured into the same crucible. "A crucible with towel service and gas leaks," I added helpfully. He ignored me. No coincidence, no madness, only pattern. I don't often get the chills around Wolfe unless he mentions exercise. But this time, I felt one. A killer who didn't just murder, he curated. It was nearly dawn when I found it. A dusty back issue of Le Monde Illustré, dated 1947, courtesy of a librarian who owed me a favor involving a missing hamster and a parking violation. There he was. The real Count Renard de Fourneau, posing with a drink in one hand and the Duchess of Rouen in the other. The face was sharp, angular, with a scar just below the ear. Aristocracy practically steamed off the page. Problem: it wasn't the man Sabine Lenoir had described to us. Her count, the one who sent wax, vanished into hallways, and had a flair for fragrant violence, had no scar, and according to her, bore the frame of a swimmer, not a duelist. The eyes were different too. One looked amused, the other hungry. Someone was wearing the Count's name like a silk scarf, fashionable, persuasive, and highly flammable. I handed the photo to Wolfe. He studied it, then murmured, "And now we tug." Tug what? A loose thread? A killer's mask? Or the fuse to something that wasn't just about murder, but memory? When Nero Wolfe calls for a performance, you don't ask what tickets cost. You start clearing the stage. I knew we were in for theatrics the moment he used the word demonstration instead of explanation. That's Wolfe code for, I'm going to humiliate someone, and it's going to be spectacular. "Archie," he said, steepling those infamous fingers, "you will request the presence of Miss Lenoir, Mr. Lerner, if he is ambulatory, and Inspector Kramer. Tonight." "Tonight?" I asked. "We staging Hamlet or a hanging?" His eyes didn't twitch. "A truth poorly spoken is a rumor. A truth enacted is irrefutable." He was in one of his Aristotelian moods. That's when I started rearranging chairs in the office, because when Wolfe starts quoting poetics, someone's going down, and it's usually not gently. By 6 p.m., Fritz had been instructed to cancel dinner service, sacrilege, and set out Perrier in place of beer. That alone would have broken Wolfe's spirit if he didn't have a bigger beast to break. He leaned back. "Archie, tonight we restore logic to an illogical act. The murderer has painted a scene. We shall view it in reverse." And sure enough, I had the front row seat. By the time the last suspect arrived, Wolfe's office looked less like the sanctum of a sedentary genius and more like a deathbed reenactment at the Old Vic. Candles glowed on the window ledge, mimicking their placement in room 13. The armchair from the north wall was dragged precisely 6 feet forward, facing the fireplace like a man awaiting a sentence. Fritz nearly fainted, carrying in the replica brass candelabra, complete with snuffer cap and hollow stem. Even the lighting was dimmed to the murky hue of the monarch's cursed corridor. Wolfe surveyed his masterpiece with a satisfied grunt. "You will stand where you stood," he instructed, gesturing to Sabine, Lerner, and Kramer. "You will say nothing unless addressed. Archie, record. We begin." Sabine flinched. Lerner looked ready to bolt, but gravity was working against him, and so was the morphine. "This," Wolfe said, "is not theatre. This is echo. Tonight, we will bear witness not to what was seen, but what was meant." He paused before striking a match with ecclesiastical drama and lighting the left-hand candle. "Observe," he murmured, "what begins as light may end in fire or silence." And as the flame flickered, so did the eyes around the room. Sabine Lenoir had held up through champagne soirees, international customs raids, and at least 2 failed marriages. But this she didn't like. "This is absurd," she said, voice tight. "What are you hoping to achieve, Monsieur Wolfe? A confession by candlelight?" "Madame," Wolfe replied without turning his head, "your sarcasm is neither original nor deterrent. You may depart, at the cost of a summons, or remain and allow your silence to speak." She clenched her gloves so tightly I thought they might squeal. "Fine," she hissed, "but I will not be accused without counsel." "You are not accused," Wolfe said, still unmoved. "You are being asked to watch." Kramer, arms folded like an irate schoolteacher, gave a grunt that could mean anything from "she's bluffing" to "where's my coffee?" Wolfe raised an eyebrow at Sabine. "Madame, silence suits you. I suggest you continue wearing it." Her response? A glare cold enough to make the candle gutters flicker. The room held its breath, and Wolfe held the next move. Wolfe extended a gloved hand and gestured delicately at the candelabra, now positioned center stage like an innocent bystander to its own crime. "The flame was never the murder weapon," he said. "It was the bait." He reached beneath the hollow base, more precise than theatrical, and pressed a mechanism. A faint click answered. "The snuffer cap," Wolfe continued, "was lined with alkaloid vapor, odorless, swift, and only lethal at proximity. Our victim bent forward, extinguished the candle, inhaled. He removed the cap and held it to the light. No residue visible to the eye, but sufficient to trigger cardiac failure in the already anxious. Kramer stepped forward, squinting. "You telling me a damn candle cap killed him?" "Yes," Wolfe said flatly. "And no, the candle did not kill him. His fear did. The poison merely timed the applause." I glanced at Sabine. Her face was a marble statue, gorgeous, expressionless, and probably plotting a lawsuit. Wolfe placed the cap gently back. "Intent is not always murder, but murder often follows intent like a shadow." He turned towards Sabine. "And I dare say, madame, yours was particularly long." The silence deepened. The trap had sprung, but Wolfe wasn't finished winding the springs just yet. "Let us dispense with veil and varnish," Wolfe said. "The motive was not revenge, nor passion, nor even profit. It was preservation, of identity, of prestige, of power." He circled the suspects with the gravitas of a planet surveying moons. "The victim had discovered your dealings, Miss Lenoir, art smuggling. Forged Provençal oils passed through hollow sculpture bases consigned by noble names and ghost signatures, and he threatened to expose you, unless the twin candelabra was returned." Sabine didn't speak, but her knuckles whitened around her purse strap like it was a lifeline. "He was not your enemy," Wolfe said softly. "Merely your mirror. You sought only to frighten him. The candle was theatre, the snuffer a whisper of danger, but fear, as you know, is rarely well behaved. He let that hang a moment. You did not expect him to die, but he did. And now, you too must step from the canvas into the frame. Kramer's jaw worked like he was chewing a lemon. I stepped closer to her chair. Motive means method. We're only missing the print. Wolfe nodded. Indeed, Mr. Goodwin. Which brought us to the final note in the symphony, the one played by a single finger. I produced the envelope like a magician pulling a rabbit. Only mine was flatter, ink-stamped, and carried more bite than fluff. Courtesy of our friends in Latent Prints, I said. The snuffer cap yielded one partial, right index. Belongs to Miss Sabine Lenoir. She exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing like a cat watching a closing door. I told you, she said quietly. I never touched the cap. Well, I shrugged. Either you've got a ghost with your manicure, or you're lying with flair. Wolfe didn't gloat. He rarely did. His version of victory is breathing a little deeper and demanding beer. Kramer stepped forward, jaw clenched. Anything else, Wolfe? He growled. No, Wolfe said, rising with imperial gravity. Merely this. Murder, however decorative, still stains. Sabine stood, composed but cornered, and I couldn't help thinking, if elegance was a weapon, she'd have had us all dead already. Kramer fished the cuffs from his coat pocket with the air of a man reluctantly remembering why he showed up. All right, Miss Lenoir, he said. Let's go. She didn't resist, didn't cry, scream, or even glance back. Just smoothed her gloves, lifted her chin, and walked out like she was modeling the fall arrest collection. Kramer turned at the threshold. Well done, Wolfe. That, from him, is roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. Wolfe inclined his head like royalty tolerating applause. Inspector, he said, would you kindly remove the artifice from my orchid room? Kramer scowled. You mean the murderer? No, the decor. With a grunt, he motioned for me to follow. You coming, Goodwin? I shook my head. I'm staying for the encore. The door clicked shut behind them. Wolfe lowered himself into his chair, deflated but satisfied. And the candle on the ledge finally burned out, its last flicker snuffed with poetic timing. But of course, the real finale still waited in the beer. Fritz delivered the bottle like it was penicillin, and Wolfe had typhoid. He took a long sip, eyes closed, like the world owed him this and more. Well, I said, another killer caught, another antique ruined, and another client who won't be paying. Wolfe opened one eye. Justice is its own remuneration. Sure, I said, but I've seen better tippers. He ignored me, staring at the cold stub of the candle. Beauty, Mr. Goodwin, he murmured, is not always benign. And with that, the brownstone settled back into its usual rhythm. But I had a feeling that flame hadn't flickered for the last time. Fritz was in a state of culinary exaltation. That's the only phrase for it. The kitchen smelled like Versailles in a stew pot. I caught a whiff of seared duck skin crisping under orange zest, and I knew dinner was going to be a coronation. Upstairs, Wolfe sat motionless in his chair, eyes half-lidded, lips curved into the kind of expression he usually reserves for orchid blossoms and epigrams by Cicero. But there was something else there too, a shadow of thought not yet voiced, like a painting half-framed. Archie, he murmured, as if the syllables tasted odd. Murder, like art, must first distort before it destroys. Sounds like something you'd embroider on a throw pillow, I said, flipping open my notebook, just in case philosophy was about to get practical. He waved that away with 2 fingers. The symmetry of the act is often its mask. Sabine Lenoir created a tableau, not a crime, or so she imagined. That is the danger of aesthetic ambition paired with moral anemia. In the dining room, Fritz lit the candelabra. In the office, Wolfe lit an idea. And me? I was beginning to wonder just how much blood can hide behind style. Fritz announced dinner like a man dropping the curtain on an opera. "Messieurs," he said, which meant me and Wolfe, "the duck is resting." Wolfe grunted his approval. I, being more democratic in taste and digestion, followed the scent trail with a kind of reverent dread. Fritz, for all his domestic restraint, had gone full rococo. Duck à l'orange arranged in arrogant spirals, pommes dauphinoises sculpted like buttered citadels, and for dessert, a pear tart so gilded it should have come with a security guard. "France," Wolfe declared between sips of Riesling, "has never apologized for decadence, nor should it." I declined the wine for a bottle of beer, and Fritz looked at me like I'd spilled ink on the Mona Lisa. "Archie," he said, "your palate is a crime scene." "Yeah, well," I told him, lifting the bottle, "if you ever want to make murder palatable, hand yourself a French cookbook." Wolfe chuckled, which in his language was the equivalent of falling off a chair laughing. And just like that, the tension from the case began to steam off, as rich and layered as Fritz's potatoes. But something in Wolfe's eyes told me we weren't quite done yet. Wolfe's fork hovered over the duck like it had committed a social faux pas. "Vanity," he said slowly, "has never needed a motive. It thrives on reflection, preferably gilded, perfumed, and immune to guilt." I raised an eyebrow. "Still on Sabine?" "She did not poison for money, nor even vengeance. She poisoned for punctuation, the final period in a portrait of herself as eternal." He dabbed at his lips with a linen napkin embroidered with the wolf crest. "Yes, he has one. No, I don't know where he got it." "She wore silk gloves, Mr. Goodwin, not to shield herself from filth, but to protect the illusion. Her legacy was not to be marred by fingerprints, literal or otherwise. It was his version of a eulogy, not sympathetic, but precise, like carving a tombstone with a scalpel." I said, "That's a pretty ribbon to tie around murder." Wolfe nodded. "And ribbons, as you know, conceal the knots." He returned to his plate. I stared at mine. Somehow, knowing why she did it made it worse. You expect murderers to be desperate or cornered. But Sabine? She just wanted the spotlight not to dim. And the irony? It never had. Right when Fritz brought out the pear tart, glistening, gold-leafed, and radiating enough smugness to run for office, the phone rang. I started to rise, but Wolfe lifted one palm. "No, that will be Inspector Kramer." He was right. "Goodwin," I said into the receiver. "Brownstone headquarters. Desserts on fire." Kramer's voice came gruff and unchewed. "She confessed. The whole damn thing. Said you staged her conscience into submission." "I'll let Wolfe know," I said sweetly. "You want us to box up some tart for you?" "Tell him," he cleared his throat. "Tell him, good work." I nearly dropped the phone. "That's it? No growl, no mention of luck or dumb witnesses. Don't push it, Goodwin." Click. I returned to the table, grinning. That was Kramer's version of flowers and chocolate. Wolfe inclined his head. "He has evolved, marginally." But I could tell he liked it. Not the flattery, but the confession. Sabine's, not Kramer's. Wolfe liked order, and nothing restores order like truth, served warm. After dinner, Wolfe migrated, which is to say, shuffled, to the plant room. I followed, purely on instinct. It's not every day he invites you into the inner sanctum twice in 1 week. He was standing over a Cattleya hybrid, with the posture of a man addressing a court. "One petal is misaligned," he muttered. "It disrupts the symmetry." He adjusted it with tweezers. I adjusted my patience. "This," he said, gesturing at the flower, "is the flaw Sabine could not abide." I gave it a look. "You're saying she killed a guy because of a crooked orchid?" "No," Wolfe said. "I'm saying she killed because she couldn't tolerate asymmetry. In art, in love, in guilt. Room 13's layout, the chairs, the candelabra. She mirrored everything, except morality." He turned, slowly. It was a fatal impulse. She didn't want to commit the perfect murder. She wanted to paint one. That made me pause. She hadn't cleaned up her trail. She'd curated it, and the world, being what it is, gave her a gallery, right up until the frame cracked. Wolfe sighed. "She tried to perfect a pattern the world never asked for." And I couldn't argue. The world has a funny way of rejecting symmetry. By the time Fritz sliced the tart, I'd sliced the case in my head a dozen different ways. All of them led to room 13 and one ornamental candle holder with a taste for death. "Funny," I told Wolfe, "how one bent piece of brass ends up orchestrating a symphony of lies, blackmail, and one too many funerals." He reached for the port and poured with the grace of a man baptizing logic. "Objects, Mr. Goodwin, are not to blame for human failings." "Sure, but they sure seem to catch a lot of fingerprints." He granted me a faint nod. The candle holder was never the weapon. It was the signature. I watched Fritz slice through the golden tart. "And Sabine? She wrote her signature in wax and poison." We let that sit for a moment. Dessert, for once, felt like an afterthought. "Sometimes," I said, lifting my glass, "it isn't the fire that kills, it's who lit it and why." Wolfe didn't reply, but the orchid behind him had opened a new bloom, and that, in Wolfe's world, was answer enough. Fritz returned with a flaming finale, branded cherries in a dish shaped like a Roman urn, the flames licking the edges like they were auditioning for arson. I was halfway to clapping when Wolfe spoke. "That will do, Fritz. Most spectacular." Fritz beamed and vanished like a stagehand after curtain call. Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "An appropriate end." I looked at the last candle still burning on the table. Just one. Its twin had gone out earlier, snuffed by a breeze through the transom, or maybe something else. I reached across the table, pinched the flame between two fingers, and extinguished it. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Symbolism, Mr. Goodwin?" "Habit," I said. "The ones that stay lit too long tend to cause trouble." He nodded, apparently satisfied. The room dipped into a softer darkness. Only the orchid light glowed, and the fire in Fritz's cherries. Outside, New York rumbled and hissed, but inside the brownstone, the final echoes of room 13 had been absorbed, into linen, into glass, into the silence that follows when beauty and murder part ways. Wolfe sipped his port. I leaned back and let the case go. Not every light deserves to stay lit. In the end, it wasn't the poison that drew the curtain. It was the vanity behind it. A single crooked candle holder, a woman obsessed with beauty, and a mind too clever for its own conscience. Justice came not with thunder, but with quiet symmetry, a whisper of orchids, a flicker of flame. But tell me, when elegance becomes a mask for malice, do we judge the hand or the intention behind it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, But the truth, once found, always echoes.